Welcome to Learning to Glow, a show about wellness, skin health, and self-development. I'm your host, Jess. I'm a mom, entrepreneur, and skincare expert. I'm so excited to share tips on how to achieve healthy skin and bring amazing guests in the field of health, fitness, aging gracefully, and personal growth. Let's explore all different ways we can take care of ourselves as women, both inside and out, to truly shine. So let's get glowing. Hi everyone, welcome back to Learning to Glow. Thank you so much for being here with me today. We are talking about something that affects so many women and it is often misunderstood, and that's iron. A lot of women are told that they have low iron, especially during pregnancy or if they struggle with heavy periods. The common solution is simply to take more iron. But what if the real issue isn't just low iron, but how iron is moving through the body? In this episode, I am joined by Samantha Chandler, and we dive into iron metabolism, ferritin confusion, heavy periods, and the key nutrients that help the body properly regulate and move iron. This conversation challenges some of the more conventional thinking around iron deficiency and explores a more root cause approach to women's health in general. So if you're not experiencing low iron or having this issue personally, there are so many nuggets of wisdom in this episode that will apply to you if you're a woman. I really love this conversation. It touches me personally. I suffer from a lot of these issues that we talk about today, and I share some of the things that I've been doing, and I am actually thrilled to learn something about more that I can do because I'm always on that mission to get better, feel better, and solve some of these root causes that I have been exploring for a while now. So please share this with someone who could also use the message. Enjoy Samantha, and this is a great one. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show today, and welcome Samantha Chandler. Thank you for being a guest on our show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk all things iron.
I'm so excited. This is a very special topic, especially personally, and I'll share more about that. But before we get into iron and this topic, tell us a little bit about you.
Okay. So I was very curious around iron. I was in my second pregnancy, and I had a doula that she was my acupuncturist. I love her dearly. And we were chatting frequently about why women are low in iron when they're pregnant. We couldn't understand it because seemed like it was really common, and we were being told that, that wasn't a good thing. You didn't want to have low iron. And so her and I would have discussions around like why we thought that was the case. We had come up with, both of us had had 2 pregnancies, didn't have low iron. And so we were like, everyone else just must be eating terrible. Like this is an other people thing, not an us thing. And then I had my blood work tested the last month of the pregnancy, and I had low iron. So I ended up taking iron supplements, and at my home birth, I had a hemorrhage, and which you can use herbs for. So my body was just doing what it's designed to do and was trying to get rid of that iron from the tissues and that excess iron that I had consumed. And so my sister had told me that she heard Morley Robbins on a podcast, and she's like, he's talking about iron. Like, this is exactly what you're looking for. You have to listen to him. And I listened to him, and it blew my mind listening to him talk about, how we are supposed to be low in iron when we're pregnant, and how we have all of these misunderstandings around iron in the body. We think that we're lacking in it, but, lacking in the blood doesn't mean that it's lacking in the body. And so that sparked my curiosity. And then ever since then, things have just taken off. And that's what I focus on. I focus on how iron is moving.
How iron is moving. Okay. This is a topic of conversation that I see with a lot of the listeners that are listening to Learning to Glow are in their 40s and 50s and beyond. And I have spoken and heard from other women who are low in iron. And they're like, I'm low in iron because I got a blood test that shows me that I am, but also maybe they're having some symptoms. So I'd like to start with and by the way, I am low in iron, really low. In fact, I just had to do some iron infusion. So I'm excited to hear what you have to say about all that. But what are some of the causes? And then Yeah, sure. Let's start with that. What are some of the causes of us being low in iron? And I never knew that that was normal to be low in iron during pregnancy.
It's physiological. So us trying to avoid low iron in pregnancy is basically trying to avoid not growing a stomach when we're pregnant.
Yeah.
So that's part of the issue. I would say what causes us to be low in iron. I would look at that question a little bit differently. I would say what causes us to not have iron circulating effectively, because
Hmm.
in 70% of the iron in our bodies is meant to be in hemoglobin. So that's going to be one of the markers that we test. And then another 10% is in myoglobin. So ideally, I'm sorry if you can hear my child in the background, but ideally we have 80% of our iron basically carrying oxygen through the body. So in a perfect world, that's where it's going to be. But iron itself isn't what causes it to move. So when we're looking at our ferritin, this is another issue, is we're looking at ferritin and we're thinking that's all of the storage iron in the body. But ferritin is meant to be in the liver. It's not meant to show up in the blood. And Sir Douglas Kell, he was knighted for his work around ferritin. He argues that ferritin should be zero, because by the time it starts appearing in the blood, then it's not functioning properly. So I don't I wouldn't say that a ferritin of zero is something that I like to see, but that's where his stance is. So there are people much smarter than me that have, various opinions around what our marker should be at, and they're completely different from what we're looking at right now. I also like to compare, so a lot of times on social media, you'll hear women saying how, they're marketing different things, saying a ferritin of 70 and above is what we need to aim for. You're going to have hair loss, you're going to have fatigue, you're going to have all of these different issues. When really it's kind of like me saying, I don't feel very good today. And then I leave the house and I see that the sky is blue. And I was like, I knew it. I knew that that blue sky was the reason I didn't feel good today. But that's not the cause. That's not the reason why we don't feel good. So, looking at things just a little bit differently than kind of the typical narrative for how I would say, like, are trained over time, and when we're having conversations with our friends, and when we're looking at perimenopause and we're thinking, boy, I'm going into perimenopause really early, I'm having all these terrible symptoms, maybe I need hormone replacement therapy. No, we just need to move the iron through the body. I would say there's this huge, I don't know what word I would use it that doesn't sound like aggressive, but attack is what's coming to mind on women's health, because women, we live longer than men because we lose blood. Our menstrual cycle helps us live longer because that's how iron is regulated. It's regulated through blood loss. So just like me having that hemorrhage when I had given birth, I was okay. Things were okay. I'm not saying everybody needs to have a hemorrhage, but my body was doing what it's trained to do, and that is to lose blood, to regulate iron, to pull out more iron from the tissues and get it back into circulation. So when we are, having, a lot of us are taking birth control from a very young age. I myself took it for 15 years, which is just astounding. And then all of a sudden, when we come off birth control, then we're put on hormone replacement therapies. And you think of all of the excess iron that we're consuming, iron infusions, things like that. That those are some big issues that we as women are going to have to come up against and deal with, because that isn't how iron moves, and so that's part of the problem. So when we're looking at like what is actually causing us to be low, well, first of all, we want to be checking our hemoglobin. Our ferritin is not where all of the iron is stored in the body. Iron can be 10 times higher in the tissues than it is in the blood. So unless we're having like a biopsy of an organ, or we're having really expensive testing done, then we're not actually going to see. I also think that a large part of our problem is that we're trained that we need to be testing in order to figure out what's wrong, when really our body is communicating with us. I really think that thyroid issues is our body's way of saying, like, it's awfully coincidental that the place that we are speaking from and using our throat and our voice as a way to communicate, if we keep numbing the body out to the symptoms, because that's how we like to look at things as a success, is like, well, if there's birth control and I'm not having heavy bleeding anymore, then that birth control is successful, when really that heavy bleeding is the body trying to communicate with us. And I think over time, as we begin to tell the body, like, no, I don't want to hear what you have to say, I don't want to hear that symptom, I'm just going to mute it, then I think that's where we're going to start seeing thyroid issues popping up, because we're disconnecting our body from us when really we're meant to have this connection with them. And part of the issue is that our soil is depleted in nutrients, copper being a huge factor with that. In the 1930s, it's estimated that we used to consume between 4 to 6 milligrams of copper a day from our whole foods. Whole foods are rich in copper, and now it's estimated that we have 9/10 of 1 milligram. And so, if we think about that, in less than 100 years, that is a drastic decrease in our minerals and our nutrients. We've had things over time like telling us to not consume salt. When we're pregnant, we're told to avoid vitamin A. Vitamin A in the form of retinol is critical for baby and mom, has a huge role in when we're breastfeeding. There's all of these different things that avoid fat. Fat was bad for a long time too.
Really bad, yeah.
All of these different things have a role with how iron moves through the body. It's our minerals that we pass down to our children. Not all babies are born with the same level of nutrients. So, for example, we know that, we just don't think of that. Like if somebody was to go and eat at McDonald's every single day when they're pregnant, you wouldn't expect that they would have the same nutrients in their baby as, say, somebody who was living off the land and eating pasture raised and organic produce. But we don't like to think of it that all babies aren't born with the same minerals, and the same thing can be for us too. So if our moms, while we're in utero, is having a lot of stress, if they are not getting the nutrients that they need, if they're taking multivitamins and prenatals and iron infusions and iron supplements, then that's all going into baby too. And so that's part of the issue, is it didn't start with us. We're talking about going back into our lineage. And so when I'm working with clients, I like to start off with, what was your mother's pregnancy like? Because that's going to tell us about where we came into this world at.
Okay, there's a lot to unpack there. So, and I want to get talking about, like, the iron is supposed to be moving through the body in a way that's maybe more of the root of the problem than you're just low iron. But before we get there, I want to ask about, because you mentioned the menstrual cycle. So we are meant to lose, we do lose blood every month. And you're saying that is what helps regulate the iron. But what about if you're having extremely heavy periods? And you mentioned like you hemorrhaged during your pregnancy, and that was what your body was designed to do. But what about the people who are having extreme periods, extreme heavy flows? And is that affecting a lot of imbalances with their iron? And I know, I'm sure we're going to talk about other reasons why maybe the iron is low, but talk to us about the menstrual cycle first, because what are we supposed to do if we have a heavy period? And then, like you said, we're disconnected. So I have a very heavy menstrual cycle, and I have been told you can do an ablation. You should do an ablation of your uterus. You should get on the pill. And those are that's what you said, like that's muting symptoms. But like, what if you're confused and we're like, what do we do to get to the cause and not just mute symptoms? Because I think that's what everybody's so desperate to know, especially because we're not offered that help when we go see our doctors.
Yeah, and part of the issue is they don't understand that. They're taught to diagnose and then prescribe. And so, there's a whole other realm of where we can work with our body. But I really don't think that, this isn't just doctors, this is the majority of us. If we think back to the 1900s, women started giving birth in what were called twilight tours. And they were going away to have birth and having no memory of birthing. And so, kind of part of us being able to pass down what our bodies are communicating has been erased over the last 120 years. And so that's really part of the issue, is we're told that we need medication, and that, we don't know what the reason is. So first of all, I used to have a heavy menstrual cycle. I used to end up at the hospital because of the amount of pain. I would faint from the amount of blood loss that I was having. It was extreme, and that was why the reason I went on birth control. And I was scared to come off of it at 15 years because of how terrible they were. But our body is doing that for a reason. So in our adrenal glands, what happens is all of the doping scandals are about a hormone called EPO. And I want you to picture like Lord Farquaad. Basically, he comes over, he's on the battlefield, they're on top of like this big hill, and there's basically like two teams of his army. And he goes to one team and he's like, build more red blood cells. And then he goes to the other side and he's like, release more iron. That's EPO. And so when we have a hemorrhage or we have a heavy blood loss, our body is very smart and it's trying to remove more iron. It's telling the body, get that iron out of the body. That's not what we need. We actually need more vitamin A, we need more copper, and the body is trying to produce a protein called ceruloplasmin. That protein is what we want copper to bind to. So some women are told that copper is toxic, like if they're having the copper IUD, they think that's the reason for all their symptoms. But it's a difference between bioavailable copper, meaning that copper is attached to that ceruloplasmin, and think of copper kind of like if you had, I like to refer to ceruloplasmin as a bus, and that's going to be how we get this process started for how iron's going to move. But think we have planes, trains, and automobiles. We have all these different ways in the body that copper can attach to different proteins. And if copper is getting a little bit impatient because there isn't enough vitamin A, or because vitamin A locks copper to that protein, or maybe there isn't enough of that protein, then copper can be like, I'm going to go off and go on these plane, trains, and automobiles, and it takes off. And that's where we can see those other symptoms coming from, where people think that copper is toxic. It's just not bound to where we need it to be. So the body is so smart. And in order to help regulate those heavy menstrual cycles, it's not by having more iron, it's not making us anemic. It's the body saying, I actually have way too much iron in my tissues, and I'm trying to pull out that excess iron, get it back into circulation so my body can get back to balance. So we need things like a lot more vitamin A. We need cod liver oil and animal organs, especially. We want things that are really rich in copper. We want lots of whole foods, as much whole foods as we can have, making sure it's not genetically modified and not sprayed with glyphosate, because glyphosate is a huge issue. I don't think that people have issues with gluten. I think that it's an issue with the amount of glyphosate and chemicals that are sprayed on the foods. The way that I think of it is because they spray it on it before they harvest it. So they're trying to dry it out and increase the yield of that product. You wouldn't just have a bottle of glyphosate in like a little spray bottle and then before you eat your meal be like, oh yeah, some glyphosate would be great, and just like start spraying it on it. But we don't think of that when we're thinking of like our pastas and our rice and different things like that. Sorry, not rice, because that's fortified with iron. That is another issue, though. A lot of people don't realize is our foods are fortified with iron. So that's another part of why I think people don't actually have a gluten issue. I think it's that it's an iron fortification issue. That's a huge problem because we are getting so much iron. And I also think, when we're thinking of iron infusions, that's not how the body was designed to absorb iron. So that's another big, really common question that I get. Well, I'm not absorbing it properly. I need more vitamin C when I'm taking it with it because my body's just not absorbing iron. Well, if we're going off of blood work, then that's not going to tell you where all the iron is in your body. First of all, the symptoms are your body trying to communicate with you and tell you that you need different nutrients. But like when we think of it this way, it doesn't make any sense. So, for example, if our body isn't absorbing anything, then just like ramming in this heavy metal isn't going to make it absorbed any better. And that's not how our body is designed to absorb iron in the first place. It's meant to come in through our mouth and go through the intestinal tract. So the iron infusion narrative really confuses me because if the issue is an absorption issue, then why are we going to an infusion in the first place? And a lot of the listeners are probably looking at having hysterectomies because they're having such a difficult time, or they're heavy bleeding and they're told that that's the only way to make it stop. If we had diarrhea, would we remove our rectum? Like, we wouldn't do that. So why is it that when it's a women's health issue, that the solution is to remove an organ that's designed to be there? That doesn't make any sense to me. I've never heard of people being like, I have chronic diarrhea, I'm just going to get my colon removed. But for whatever reason, when it's our womb, they're like, well, let's just take that out, and as if that solves the problem. But again, that's just the body trying to get back to balance and removing one of the ways that it's trying to regulate itself. Just because we don't know what it's communicating doesn't mean to just be pulling out organs.
I know that it's really frustrating because that is a go-to. And I've had, a lot of people in my life that is something that's happened to them. And, it has been suggested to me as well. And so I want to go back to, you said you used your periods sound very extreme. Like that sounded terrible. So you're going through that. Then you get on the birth control pill. What happened when you get off? Like, so tell us what you did, because now I'm learning. Did you have too much iron? Is that something and that is why you're over bleeding? And then tell us. You gave us some examples like the cod liver oil and Whole Foods, but tell us some other things that you did and how long did that take you to regulate, and now you have normal cycles. So tell us a little bit about that process for somebody who's going through this, because this is very different than what we've been told.
Yeah. So I actually went to acupuncture. Big fan of acupuncture. I think like
Yeah.
that's one thing that we should all be really considering doing. And the acupuncturist asked me whether or not my flow had started because I'm 7 months postpartum. What day is it? Yeah, 7. And I was like, no, but I wish that it would. I wish that my body would, remove some of this iron because I can feel it. So when I came off birth control, that was when I became pregnant with my oldest son. And I didn't have a great pregnancy. It was really, really exhausting and very, very difficult. And mentally, I was not in a good place. And in that postpartum period, okay, remember how I was talking about the thyroid and how
Yeah.
that's our body communicating? So I developed Raynaud's in my breasts. So Raynaud's, for anybody who's listening and doesn't know, it's basically like a lot of people get in their fingers and their toes, and it's where the circulation essentially stops. And then all of a sudden you'll get this big flow that goes there. It's super painful. You can end up with like basically your skin kind of like chapping in those places. So I developed it in my breasts, and my breasts were like raw. My nipples were raw because of how painful it was. It was excruciatingly painful, and I was really frustrated with it because a lot of people didn't know what Raynaud's in my breast was. I would go see lactation consultants, and they had no idea. When I was talking about how painful it was, they were like, well, yes, breastfeeding can be painful. It's a first time mom, super dismissive. It was not, it was really difficult. So I had been told that a calcium magnesium pill can help with Raynaud's. So I also found that drinking wine was like my only saving grace. I would put my son down and I would have a tiny glass of wine, and I could instantly feel my blood vessels dilate and I could feel my blood flow easier. So wine was my go-to to help with that. And it sounds silly, but it was like my one saving grace. So I was taking my calcium magnesium pill, and again, think of me like muting the symptoms to my body. Whenever we're talking about autoimmune, that means there's an emotional component through and through. I had lots of emotional work that I needed to do that I was suppressing during that time. And I took that pill and it became stuck in my throat. And long story short, I ended up at the hospital. They sent me home. They couldn't see the pill, so they figured that I just cut my esophagus. I couldn't swallow, couldn't sleep. I was exclusively breastfeeding, so I went back. And on the second day, they did a scope and they found the pill basically just far enough where my stomach couldn't get any acidity to break it down, but it was lodged in my throat there. Well, think of that from an emotional standpoint. I was not speaking my truth. I had all of this, that fear that I was repressing. Fear and iron go hand in hand. That's part of why, it's awfully ironic that fear on the period or iron on the periodic table is Fe. They connect with each other. And so when we're having these different physical symptoms, I think a lot of the time we look to have like at it linear, that there has to be this outside source. Well, sometimes it's helpful to look inwards and say, how is what I've gone through or something that I'm not willing to address part of this that's happening right now. And when I would it was after my second son when I started doing all of this, and that was when I really saw my periods, like I didn't know that they could be so easy. They became so easy. I was very confused with like the amount of blood flow because clotting in your period blood is a sign that your liver needs some help. Well, iron accumulates in the liver first, so that's why a lot of women will have the clotting in their period blood. And it just went so smooth. So cod liver oil was one of the things that I started taking. The type matters significantly. So if somebody's listening to this and they're not sure which ones to take, there's only 3 brands that I like. Don't go rogue. Don't think I'm going to buy a cheaper one, because they basically cook them at a really high temperature and then they synthetically add the ingredients back to them. So if finances are difficult, then you're going to want to make sure that you're getting a quality cod liver oil and not taking it as often, as opposed to getting a cheaper one and taking it every single day. So Zeta is like the Cadillac. Another great one is Jigsaw, and another one is Formula IQ. Those are the 3 cod liver oils that I like. If somebody's in the United States, then you can buy them right from their sites. But internationally, iHerb is the way to go. You can get them all through iHerb internationally for affordable prices. Another thing is beef liver and organs. Beef organs are really important. I'm inclined to think that beef spleen is way more important than we give it credit for. A lot of people think that it's because it's high in iron. I think like supports like, though. So in northern Canada, when they would hunt an animal, the first thing that they would do is, when it was killed, is they would eat the eyes, because the eyes supported their eyes. They would eat these nourishing organs because they wanted to support their own. So I also think that that's a huge part of it too, is if we're deficient, or our organs are deficient in different things, then consuming those are really important. And liver is important because it's one of the richest sources of copper that we can get. But I also think there's an energetic component when we're consuming organs that can help support those organs within us. Adrenal cocktails, so important. Whole food vitamin C cured scurvy. So, again, anybody who doesn't know, scurvy was a bleeding gum disease. Sailors used to eat limes and lemons in order to help with that. That is, if bleeding gums were cured with vitamin C, then maybe that's a good route for us to go when we're having heavy menstrual flow. Sodium and potassium is part of an adrenal cocktail too, though. So that's really, really important, because yeah, a lot of people think of iron being, what we need to move through the body. Well, we're made up of water. And if our water isn't flowing and we're not, properly hydrated, then it's not going to get into the cell at a cellular level. A lot of clients that I have that are having like constipation or issues with bowel movements, a lot of it can come down to just not having enough potassium and magnesium. And so that's really important too. So having an adrenal cocktail, I would be really skeptical over some of the electrolytes out on the market though. So for example, I have an electrolyte company. Obviously, I'm going to be a little bit biased here, but I haven't seen clean ingredients in other ones like that are in the one that I made. And I made it because I can't find those clean ingredients anywhere. So if you're taking electrolytes and just adding a whole food vitamin C supplement on top of it, it needs to be whole food, not just a vitamin C, because a vitamin C is going to have ascorbic acid. They're thought to be the same thing, but they're not the same when you get into the inner core of them. Ascorbic acid is missing an enzyme called tyrosinase. And so when people are having like pigmentation issues, when they're looking at color, melanin is where we're going to get color from. Tyrosinase has a role in that, and so does copper. So having clean electrolytes is really, really important. Not just while I'm talking about these things can help, the quality is just as important as what we're taking.
Okay, before we move on, I have a couple questions.
Yeah.
First of all, the beef liver. So if we don't want to eat beef liver and cook it ourselves, which I do not, I have, and I used to do chicken liver too, but I can eat a lot of things, but I struggle with that. What about supplementation? And do you think that's good? And do you have a brand that you recommend? Tell us about that, because I think I'm definitely going to do the cod liver oil. I need to get that back into my diet. I'm not doing that. And so thank you for those recommendations, but tell us about the beef liver.
So beef liver, or it can be beef organ, whichever one you prefer.
Okay.
An American brand that I love is Heart and Soil. I love them so, so much. One
Okay.
day I hope they call me and they're like, we heard that you love us. But yeah, would be the route that I would go for an American company. In Canada, it's called Higher Healths with an S on
Okay.
the end. They're a really great option. And iHerb is really dicey for which ones are on there. So I would say those are like my 2 main recommendations. Try and get them right from the companies themselves. but I also don't like to eat beef liver. So there's a few ways around it. One is I bought a meat grinder. It's just a KitchenAid attachment. So when I buy my whole cow, I ask for different organs and I'll thaw them, put them through the meat grinder, and then I freeze them into little tiny. I bought like a silicone tray to make dog biscuits for my dog that I've just never done. So I make little dog biscuits out of the liver and then I freeze them into a bag like that. And then that way, when I make ground beef or ground pork, then I take some of that frozen little kind of niblets, put it in with it, and mix it in. Because then my kids can't tell that there's animal organs in it, and everybody wins. Another really great option is some people like to grate it while it's frozen, and then they take those grated shavings and add it in. So as long as you're hiding it in foods, if you've, and the amount is going to differ by person. So if you can taste it and you're like, this tastes disgusting, then we have gone too far. We want it to be where we can't taste it and we don't know that it's there and we're still enjoying the food, because that's really what we want it to be, is we want that connection while we're eating. It's really important that we're enjoying what we're eating. So forcing it into us isn't a good option. There's a really great company called Pluck. They're out of the United States, and they make a seasoning of different organs that you can sprinkle on top of your food after it's cooked. So, for example, like we had fajitas last night. When my kiddos, who are 5 and 2, were eating it, I sprinkled some of that on top. It tastes delicious, doesn't taste like animal organs, but that means that they were just getting a little bit extra on top of their meal. So that can be a good route to go to.
Okay, thank you. So we have some options here. And I know you can go and get these things at the grocery stores, some of the more specialty grocery stores too, and do it, do the DIY version. I think that's great. But yeah, for people, a lot of people don't want to just eat a plate of liver and onions. I know that was popular back in my grandma's day, but that's tough for me. And probably I'm not cooking it as yummy as they did it back then, right? My second question is, you mentioned adrenal cocktails, and I am doing one, but I want to see an example of what you would recommend. But I was told to do a little bit of orange juice, coconut water, cream of tartar, and sea salt.
Yeah, that's
So
perfect.
is that a good example of?
Yeah, that's a great option to have. There's a few things to keep in mind with that. Is one, I'm not a huge fan of orange juice.
Okay.
So if we're gonna have orange juice, ideally it's gonna be like from us making the like pressing it and making the juice rather than buying the bottle. That would be one route to go. Or you could get like a dehydrated kind of version where it's either acerola powder, that's one that's really high. Camu camu is another one, and just sprinkle it in and add it to a drink. That would be another route to go if you're going to make it yourself. But essentially, it's just we want to make sure we're getting a lot of whole food vitamin C, that we're getting sodium and potassium. So, coconut water is a good option because it has magnesium in it as well. And the cream of tartar is a good route because that's going to be the potassium. But I also think that when we go to make them every single day by ourselves, then just to be really mindful of actually making it and taking it between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. That's the best times to take them. If you take them too late in the day, then they can give a big energy boost. And some people will message me and be like, I've been wired all night long. And then I ask them a time and they're like, yeah, I took it right before bed. So that's another part of it too, is the timing that you're taking it at. But so it can be helpful to have like a supplement on hand for an adrenal cocktail on those days where you're like, I just don't have time to make this. I'm just going to take my supplement instead. But yeah, that I would say that's like the typical adrenal cocktail version where we're talking orange juice, the cream of tartar, and the sodium.
Well, tell us, did you say your product is an electrolyte? Would it be the same as the adrenal cocktail? To shout out what you have.
So I named it Drink Neat after my grandfather who would drink his whiskeys neat. So, and they all have like a spin off of a name of a drink. So the adrenal cocktail that I have is called salty fashioned, like an old fashioned. But something that I noticed from working with the clients that I've had is that part of the issue when we're taking supplements is that we're starting off at the recommended amount. And the recommended amount, I would say, because of how dysregulated a lot of our iron is way too much for most people to get started with. So, if I said to somebody who has a sedentary lifestyle, walking 10,000 steps a day is ideal. So then they go out and walk 10,000 steps. they're going to call me and they're going to be like, Samantha, I'm allergic to walking. I can't do this. I'm sore. I don't feel good. They're going to have all these issues. Even though that walking is good for them, it's way too fast for their body. And supplements are the same thing. So a lot of the time we're thinking, well, I need to get to this recommended amount, and it's just way too high for a lot of people. So the recommended amount on mine is much lower than you'd find on other ones because the goal is to, meet you where you're at, and then that way it's easier to get started. Another thing with it, I find B vitamins are so important. A whole bunch of women think that they need a methylated B vitamin, which I don't understand the logic behind that at all because it's still a synthetic vitamin. When we're thinking of things in isolation, like I'm talking about the importance of vitamin A and I'm talking about the importance of copper, I'm talking about them in their whole food forms. So there's a much bigger difference than if, like, I would never tell anybody to just take a vitamin A in the form of retinol and that's all that's in it. We're talking about whole food forms that they're naturally occurring in. And we're looking at a methylated vitamin. It's just simply, it's, I believe B vitamins need copper in order to be activated. And that's really the issue. It doesn't make any sense why the most evolved species would all of a sudden have this issue with B vitamins and need some supplement that isn't naturally occurring because of that. So I think B vitamins are super important for iron's movement and regulating it. Another thing that I think is interesting is in our bone marrow is where the majority of our copper is meant to be. So if somebody's listening and they think that they're copper toxic, we are looking at 1% of all of the copper in our body when we're looking at our blood. Mm-hmm. So if we are looking at the copper and it comes back high, that doesn't mean copper is high in the body. It just means that it's high in the blood. We are using that to then try and figure out what the other 99% of the copper is doing. And 46% of our copper is meant to be in our bone marrow. And that's actually a really rich source of B vitamins as well. So I can't imagine why when we were designed, there would be the richest source of copper in the body tagging along with a rich source of B vitamins if they didn't have some kind of a relationship with each other. So if we're taking a methylated B vitamin and there's no copper, it doesn't make any sense to me. So when I make the formulas for them, I'm doing it through the lens of how can we move iron? What ingredients can I include that are rich in B vitamins? What are some natural ways? Some of the other ones are going to be electrolytes because some of them aren't going to be high in vitamin C. So for example, I have Velveteeni. It's such a cool drink. It has matcha, lavender, butterfly pea powder, vanilla in it. It's a really light drink, but it's also got like the sodium and the potassium in it. So it's technically an electrolyte, but it doesn't have the high form of vitamin C in it, but it's a natural way that we can flavor our drinks without having all of these unnecessary fillers that are added to them. So I would say that everything that I've made has been designed with a purpose, and I do it all through the lens of how can we move iron through the body. And so a lot of them are going to be rich in B vitamins.
Okay, I'll make sure I link this. It all sounds amazing. I'll make sure to link your website when I do the show notes. But before, okay, so there's so many questions. I'm like, oh my gosh, because it's really, we think we don't know all of this information, right? That you're sharing with us is so much great information. Let's talk about the food a little bit that we're consuming right now. I think that one thing that you've kind of highlighted throughout this conversation is whole food. And it's not just like whole food. You're also talking about the quality of our food. And so what can, and I know maybe some of this, but like, what are some other things that can happen if we are living a life where we're constantly consuming the processed foods and artificial flavors and sweeteners and things like that? What do you see as a result of somebody living that type of diet?
I think a lot of it has like a spleen deficiency to it. So when I'm thinking of somebody who's spleen deficient, I can tell just based on their energy. They're the kinds of people, and I'm sure you're going to know what I mean, but they're the kinds of people who, when they reach out, they are like almost in a panic. Like if their answer is not, or if their question isn't answered like immediately, they are gonna like lose their mind. They are over consuming on social media. they are looking through all of these different platforms to try and find their answer. And each time they're like, now I think I have this. Now I think I have this issue. Now I think I have this. It's that we can overconsume on our phone. We can overconsume on food. It's part of, I would say, like a disassociation and numbing out is a huge part of it. So I think that's a huge part of it. Also, think of like where we're supposed to be eating. We're supposed to eat with other people. We're not meant to be eating and staring at our phone. So that's part of that too, is if we have that connection, I do think that we're going to make some better choices when we're all eating together. And, if we're eating as a family or with our partners or out with our girlfriends, that's a big part of it. But at the end of the day, if we're putting things into our body that are meant to fuel the body and it's not actually real food, just because it's bought in a store and it has a package on it doesn't mean that it's meant to go in our bodies. It just means that the government has said, hey, you can eat this. I would, be thinking about that maybe once or twice, because some of them aren't even real foods anymore. They're just chemicals. So our bodies don't know what to do with that. They haven't been designed, we haven't evolved with these kinds of chemicals. And we're taking things and trying to beat Mother Nature by, again, like iron fortification. That is a huge, huge issue. For anybody who doesn't know, so in the US, Canada, and the UK in 1941, they began fortifying our foods with iron. Then in 1969, on April Fools, as if it was almost like a joke, a group went to the US government, I believe it was 12 doctors, and said, hey, listen, we actually need to 3 times the amount of iron that we've been adding because it hasn't worked. People are still anemic, and this is still a really big issue. So even against, I believe it was 170 people that, doctors and specialists in the area had said, no, do not support this, do not increase our iron any further. They did. They increased it by 50%. And again, logically speaking, if somebody came to you and said, hey, I'd like you to invest in this business, and you're like, awesome, like tell me about it. And they go, well, what we've been doing for the last 30 years hasn't worked. So what our goal is we want your money, and we're just going to do it 3 times as hard as we were doing it for the last 30 years and see how that works. And be like, you want my money and it hasn't worked for 30 years, and you think that just doing it even harder, this bad idea even harder, is going to work now? It doesn't make any sense. And now there's over 80 countries that have iron fortification. So that's a huge issue too, because the reason that it was brought in is pregnant women are low in iron, and that's why we need to increase it. So 1% of the population is pregnant at any given moment, so the other 99% are just gobbling down all this extra iron. And I like to stay away from like the reason that we shouldn't consume extra iron, because I want people to make decisions that are based out of healing and love, because I think love will always win. And I think fear is a really easy way to get people to make decisions. Like I could talk about what we should fear and why we shouldn't do it, but I don't think that that's really the empowering route that I want to go down. But what I will say is, if you think of a cast iron pan, and the reason we dry it right away is because it rusts. So you have oxygen, iron, and water, all 3 of those interacting, and that's what can happen in our tissues. So how is that not stressful when that's happening inside of us? So what we really want to focus on is balancing our minerals, getting back to a more natural state. I really think that supplements are important, but I think that they need to be whole food supplements. These prenatals and multivitamins and all this other garbage that's out there, those aren't whole foods. And it doesn't matter if it's the latest technology. I think we think that, technology it's better. Somehow it's better. But look at what we've been doing again for 120 years. And I just don't know how this is better. We are so much sicker as a population. And really, that's the complete opposite direction that we should be going in. So I would say when we are consuming these kinds of things, we're going against what our body is designed to do. And when we look at getting back to eating whole foods, and nobody's saying that you have to be perfect. Like, I love my iced coffee with my vanilla flavoring just as much as the next guy does. But I definitely think that it's about making sure that overall, like, thinking about what we're putting into our body, and thinking of where things were grown. That is so important. And was it the energy around these products that we're putting into our body? We like to think of like all bell peppers as being the same, and they're not. If something is being sprayed heavily, that's not going to be the same just because they're both red bell peppers. And so that's important to think about too. If you have the ability, grow some of your own produce instead of purchasing it, or look to buy it at farmers markets and locally from people that you can go and visit these farms and see how they're growing and ask them some questions. When we just moved to where we live now, I went and met one of the farmers, and I was asking, like, do you have your soil tested? What kind of nutrients are you seeing that commonly come up? And he started laughing. He's like, I saw your social media. I knew you were going to ask me about my iron concentration in my soil. And he said that they grow alfalfa fields because they don't have enough copper in their soil. And alfalfa is high in copper. So they grow these alfalfa fields, and then they let the animals go and graze on some alfalfa so that they can have some copper. So we know this for animals. We just don't think of it for ourselves. And so I think if we can just get back to basics, try and be 1% better every single day. In a year's time, you could be 365% better than you are today, just by working on doing one small thing every single day. And they add up over time.
That's so great. There's so much that we can work on and improve, especially because we're all so busy, and it is easier sometimes to take that shortcut in a lot of ways. And I feel like I used to be way more like when my kids were little, things were slower. I did a lot of things from scratch. I took a lot more time doing things for them and for me. And now it's like my busyness has been like an excuse to kind of step away from some of that. And I have seen, for me personally, like a negative impact on my health. So it's like really important to know all this information. Thank you so much for sharing all of this, because I feel like it is, if we can start with adding some things in that are going to put us in the right direction, especially if we're not feeling good, right? Like your clients come to you not because they're feeling great and everything's perfect. So there's so many of us who are struggling, and we're having fatigue, and we're having, different symptoms. I mean, I have so many of the symptoms and issues that you mentioned. I have my thyroid issues, and I have the iron issue. And so it's like, and the frustrating thing is like not knowing what to do and how to take care of it. So taking some of these things that you mentioned is going to be really important, especially for me. I'm definitely going to be looking up all of these things that you recommended. But for everybody listening who wants to learn more about you, wants to work with you, wants to check you out, follow you, where can they do that?
So I have a whole bunch of different ways. If you head on over to my website, wellnessandwomb.com, I've got lots of free content on social media. I have free ebooks if they want to join my school community. The issue that I had is I was emailing out the ebooks, but then as I update them, then it gets taken down, and then people can't access them. So the school community is a way better option. It's free to join. If you're looking for like extra long videos that I have, lots of detail, handouts, I have that in like the other option of the school community. And then I have options there if you want to work with me, if you want us to look at some blood work. HTMA testing is the one that I like to look at as well. Then we can certainly look at doing like a one-on-one personalized session where I come up with a plan, and then we go from there.
Okay, awesome. I'll put this all in the show notes for everybody so it's nice and easy. Thank you so much for sharing with us today. I so appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. Please subscribe and review so we can reach more people who want to learn to glow alongside us. See you next time.